Welcome to the Governance Edge, which is our interview series where we bring you insights from leading experts on the issues that matter most to board directors today. In each conversation, we explore timely governance challenges and provide some practical perspectives on how directors can cope with them most effectively. So today, let me welcome Caroline. Thank you for joining us today. And our topic is CEO succession planning and the compensation implications of that process. So let's start, if we could, by talking about why is CEO succession planning so important?
Absolutely. And thank you for the time today, Kris. So successfully hiring, developing, and potentially transitioning your CEO, this is a core governance responsibility of the board. As you can imagine, it has significant internal and external implications, and it's critical to maintaining business continuity. So this is really an area where it's worth the board's time to focus on and really take a deep dive on this topic.
What kind of scenarios do you confront as a director?
Yeah. So CEO succession or transition typically is going to present itself in one of two ways. Either it's unplanned, which may be the case in the event of an unexpected health crisis or an unexpected involuntary termination, or it's a planned transition, such as a retirement. Boards may hope that they see primarily planned transitions because in that scenario, you're often going to have a little bit longer runway to evaluate and determine how you're going to respond to this transition. But it's really important that as a board, you consider each of these scenarios in your succession planning conversations so that you have a roadmap in the event one of these situations materializes.
And CEO transitions are becoming more commonplace today, huh?
They really are. I think that we've seen maybe there's a bit of an ebb and flow over time, but certainly over the course of probably, in my experience, the past 18 months, they really have picked up, and we are seeing a greater incidence of CEO transitions across the public space.
So given the unpredictability of some of the scenarios, when does a board need to start their CEO succession planning?
Yeah, this is a quick and easy answer. I would say if you haven't already, start now. You want to start now with these conversations so that you're ready in the event of either an emergency succession, but then also so that there's time as a board to really put some thought to the qualities and the experience that you'd like to see in your future CEO. And then it's also a great time to start to think about within the organization, who do you have in terms of other executive talent that you want to invest time into developing them so that they become your pipeline of future CEO talent? So the earlier you identify these individuals, the earlier you can start to potentially provide them face time with the board, maybe provide them face time with investors. But overall, the objective is to just enhance their readiness so that you've got a strong bench in the event that you find yourself in the midst of a CEO transition.
So how do you start the process? What can you do to prepare to be successful in this?
Yeah. So I think first, and this really, it may sound simple, but I would start by, as a board, understanding your current CEO's timeline. And then ask yourselves, are you aligned with that timeline? Or do you need to go back and maybe reset expectations? That would be step one. And then step two, we talked about, again, identifying that bench of internal talent. You really want to start thinking about continuing to develop their readiness so that, again, as you think about preparing for the eventual exit of your CEO, you have your potential successors ready and waiting in the wings.
So let's move on to some compensation implications of what happens or what do you need to focus on during a CEO succession?
Yeah. So what's great to know is that before you even get to that point where you are in the midst of a CEO transition, you can support CEO succession planning through compensation actions. One of the first steps that I would recommend taking is to conduct what you might hear described as a holding power analysis or a retention analysis. And the goal of this is to understand what would your CEO be walking away from in the event that he or she resigned or retired on a timeline that's different than what you're expecting. The goal of this for most companies would be to ensure that the value of unvested awards that a current CEO holds is valuable enough or compelling enough to encourage or incentivize that individual to stay in their role to fulfill the planned timeline. If you go through this analysis and you look at the current value of those unvested awards, and typically those unvested awards are going to be your unvested stock awards. If you take a look at that value and it seems like it's fairly low, and that low value could be attributable to the fact that perhaps stock price has been trading at a depressed value for a period of time. But if it looks like it's low enough that it would be easy for him or her to walk away without a lot of consequence, then that may prompt another conversation where you think about doing something to bolster that retentive value. You may want to consider increasing the value of the CEO's next annual grant. You may want to consider a special award, again, just really with the objective of ensuring that those unvested awards are sticky, that they are really incentivizing these individuals to stay in seat for as long as the board and they would like. And that retention analysis, it's effective to take a look at it for the CEO. It's also great to cast it down a level and run a similar analysis for that bench of leadership talent that we've been describing. Again, these are the individuals that you're investing your time and energy into. This is your pipeline of potential future CEO successors. And so what you want to ensure is that the value that they hold or that they stand to realize is similarly sticky and incentivizes them to stay with the organization for as long as you would like. So those are definitely sort of two, I would say, pay actions or compensation analyses to arm yourself with. And then another one that I would encourage boards to do is, we talked in the beginning about the fact that CEO succession or CEO transitions can present in a variety of scenarios. It's worth understanding the compensation that the CEO would be eligible for across each of those scenarios and understand, is that compensation competitive? Does everybody understand how it works? And the one that I would point to in that example would be retirement, because that often is going to be a very common pathway that CEOs will pursue to exit the organization. And so if you don't have a formal retirement policy that clearly spells out the expectations on the part of the company in terms of the notice the CEO must give and how they must support the transition in exchange often for favorable vesting on their unvested awards, if you don't yet have that policy, I would absolutely recommend putting that in place before you find yourselves on the precipice of a retirement.
Yes, the use of a compensation strategy to enable that planful process that you talked about, so that someone has to provide notice and understands that if they're a good actor during their departure, that they'll get a vesting or whatever the hold incentive is.
That's exactly right.
So let's talk a bit about the key decisions that the board needs to address during this process.
Yeah. So once you find yourself in the midst of a CEO transition, there are going to be key decisions that the board will be faced with, each of which will also have their own compensation implications, and really are areas where it's likely the board may need to spend some time to sort of wrestle with how is this going to play out. And it's going to be dependent upon the type of transition. Again, is it planned or unplanned? But a few key decisions to address. One might be, will your outgoing CEO go onto the board? Do you envision that your outgoing CEO goes onto the board in a board leadership role, such as an executive chair or non-executive chair position? And then the compensation implication of that is, what will be the outgoing CEO's new pay as a board member? And obviously that will look very different from CEO level pay. So making sure that you understand that and are able to communicate that will be vitally important. Sometimes in a CEO transition, companies will want the CEO to stick around for a little while to support the transition. And sometimes the way that they do that is the CEO will step into either a special advisor or a consultant role just for a period of time. It's temporarily or it's temporary in nature. But again, the compensation implication there is what's the rate of pay that you'll set for that temporary consultant or advisor role. Certainly as you start to sort of expand then and are thinking about the starting salary or starting compensation package for your incoming CEO, that can vary depending upon whether you are promoting someone internally from that bench of talent that we've described, or whether you're hiring an experienced CEO from the market. The size of that compensation package can look different in those two scenarios. And if you're hiring somebody from the external market, chances are you may also need to consider inducement awards to make up for value that your candidate is leaving on the table at their current employer. And then last, something to think about is to the extent that of that leadership bench we've been talking about, you have individuals that thought they might have a chance for the CEO spot, but ultimately were not selected. You may want to consider taking a compensation action to continue to retain those individuals. You want them to feel like they are still valuable to the organization. And so the board or committee may think about perhaps granting a special award, along with overall encouraging and development that you would continue to invest in those individuals.
So it can be surprisingly more inflationary to recruit a CEO from the outside, and maybe you should budget for it as well.
Yes, you may get a little bit of sticker shock because you'll not only have, again, a pay package to start off your externally hired CEO, but if they are leaving a material amount of unvested equity, maybe a forfeited bonus award at their current employer, and they're expecting you to try to perhaps not make up all, but at least make up a portion of that, that can add up very quickly. So being very planful in the budgeting process for the overall value from the get-go is a great way to think about it.
And maybe just to wrap up, can you touch on some of the best practices to ensure a really smooth CEO transition?
Sure. So really the opportunity here is to run as planful and thoughtful a process as you can. And often this will be done with a dedicated team or a special committee of the board. But within that dedicated team or special committee, you want to have really clear delineation of responsibilities. And in particular, it's really important to know who is communicating with whom. And precisely what I mean there is know who's communicating with your outgoing CEO, know who is communicating with your incoming CEO, so that you can have some confidence that the messages are not getting lost in translation with a variety of individuals reaching out and having conversations with each of those two individuals. And then it's also important to have a really clear timeline for the decisions that you're making, particularly as you start to get closer to the point where you're going to need to make an external disclosure and essentially announce the CEO transition to your investors. You want to understand what that timeline looks like, so that, again, everybody has an opportunity to align around the messaging and that overall communication strategy, both internally and externally, well in advance. And then the last piece of advice that I would offer as you find yourself in a CEO transition is to leverage your external advisors. These are going to be individuals who may be external counsel, they may be your executive search firms, your compensation consultants, but these are individuals who are really kind of in the weeds on CEO transitions very often. They can provide guidance on these key decisions that we discussed. They can help you think through the compensation implications, the disclosure implications, and just really support the process for the benefit of all involved.
Well, and given that the selection of the CEO is probably the most important and meaningful decision that a board can make, having people who've been through it before and know some of the pitfalls and opportunities and best practices is really a helpful piece of the puzzle.
That's absolutely right.
So, well, thank you so much, Caroline, for joining us and sharing your insights into this process. And thanks to those of you who have listened to this for joining us for the Governance Edge series. Please feel free to stay connected with us for more conversations with leading experts, and be sure and follow the NACD TriCities Chapter to learn about upcoming programs and new sessions.